You are listening to episode 23 of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. The idea for today's episode came from a reader. Someone sent me a message on Instagram and she acted like it was a silly idea. She said, "Why don't you share a week in the life of your sourdough starter, LOL?" And I was like, actually, that's a really good idea because I get a lot of questions that people are just really confused about when to feed and how much to feed and what if it goes in the fridge and just wanting to know that basic schedule. And so I did put together a week in the life of my sourdough starter and I'm ready to share that with you. And make sure to stay all the way to the end because I will be answering another one of your random questions from my Instagram stories. My name is Lisa, mom of 6 and creator of the blog and YouTube channel Farmhouse on Boone. Join me as I share with you my love for creating a handmade home from scratch cooking and a little mom and entrepreneur life along the way. Now, I was going to do this from the perspective of my sourdough starter. I was writing out a little outline and I put something like, I was fed this day and I was put in the fridge. And then I didn't know if I was going to refer to myself as mom and it got weird. So I decided I'd just basically tell you what happened with the starter. And I am a bit congested again. I think that I made a big mistake in doing an episode on what we do when we're sick because then after that, we've been sick. And I felt like we hadn't been sick the entire winter. But we're okay. I just have a little bit of a runny nose and hiding out from coronavirus. I'm not really overly concerned about it. I feel like there's a lot of hype. Again, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. I did buy some beans yesterday just in case there's any crazy, weird quarantines. We're staying fairly low key. I didn't bring any of the kids into the grocery store yesterday, mostly out of concern for other people because from what I understand, it's older people and people who have underlying respiratory health issues that can really be devastated by the coronavirus. And so my kids are coughing and we stayed out of church on Sunday and we are staying out of the grocery stores just as a precaution. We'll see how it all unfolds in the next couple weeks, but we'll stay a little bit low key. Okay, so as far as the sourdough starter, it is Monday morning. The sourdough starter has been in the fridge since Saturday after breakfast. So Sundays, typically our schedule involves waking up really early. We go to the 8 o'clock church service, but we live 45 minutes from our church. Now, it's not that there isn't a church closer by. There's actually a church in our town, which would be just a few miles. But we started going to our church that we go to whenever we lived in our old house. We go with Luke's grandma to the 8 o'clock service. We sit with her, and we just didn't want to stop doing that. We didn't want to stop going to our Sunday school. And the thing is we would be driving out that way anyways because our families still live out there. And so Sundays we spend with family. So we go to church, then we go to his parents and have lunch. Then we go out to my family's farm and Daniel, you're being so loud, buddy. And we spend the day there. The kids have a blast. They have cattle. We just saw a baby calf be born, hey buddy, last Sunday, and the creek was running and it was so warm. So we love spending the day there and we just stay till dark. So no sourdough happens at all on Sunday. No cooking happens for me hardly ever unless there's some other kind of weird plans. So by Monday, the sourdough starter has been sitting in the refrigerator since Saturday after breakfast. It comes out of the fridge and on this particular Monday in the week in the life of my starter, now this could be different, very different from any given week, but this is a very good example sample week for you. So it comes out of the fridge and I use a couple of scoops to make crepes. Now, aren't crepes and anything supposed to be made with a fed starter? Yes, but I bend a lot of rules and I find that everything is just fine when I do. So in this particular case, I brought the starter out of the refrigerator, took some scoops out of it and made crepes right away with the cold, unfed starter. After that, I threw in a few scoops of freshly milled Einkorn. Now I've mentioned this before, but I've started feeding my sourdough starter with exclusively Einkorn from Einkorn berries that I mill. To reference back to where I got them, I found a really good deal. The cheapest I could find, it's at bit.ly/einkornberries. But anyways, I don't measure. I get a lot of people who want to know how much do you throw in. So let's say that my starter on this particular day is down to a couple of cups, and I know that I want to be making something sourdough the rest of the week. I'll throw in 3 or 4 cups of flour. I just scoop it. I don't even measure. And then add enough filtered water until it is about a pancake batter consistency. Now, if you want to keep a thicker starter, you can do that. You just add more flour. Either way, it'll bubble up and be fine if it's a nice mature starter. So on this particular day, after the crepes, I threw in a couple of cups of freshly milled einkorn flour and some Berkey water. Now after that, I took the flour that I didn't feed it with, so after I had enough, and I put it in a glass jar sitting next to the starter. This I'll use later to feed it again. Now I don't like to keep a ton of milled flour because whenever something is freshly milled, the nutrient content of it goes down really rapidly. Since it's the whole grain, it also goes bad more quickly. So this isn't something I want to keep long term, but if I have a little extra flour, I just throw it in that jar and I'll feed it later. Okay, so the starter, this is still Monday, sits and bubbles on the counter until Monday evening. Then I took out some starter, about a cup, to make a double batch of English muffins for Tuesday. Then I just threw it back in the fridge. Since I was going to be making English muffins on Tuesday and I knew I wouldn't be making any crepes, I put the starter back in the fridge without feeding it. So it was fed Monday after crepes, and then it went into the fridge Monday evening. Tuesday, it sits in the fridge all day. This is the day that I made English muffins. I made a double batch. We had some for breakfast. We took some on a hiking trail with us to make sandwiches. And then I took Tuesday evening a little bit more starter out to get some tortilla dough soaking for Wednesday. Just left it in the fridge, didn't feed it at all, but did take out some sourdough starter again to make those tortilla doughs. Now again, somebody might say, I thought you're supposed to use fed starter for tortillas. Technically, yes, you are, but my take on it is when you add that starter to the tortilla dough recipe, which contains flour and water, it essentially is getting fed while the tortilla dough is soaking. Again, I tell you how it's supposed to be done in my blog, but then I bend all kinds of rules. So just know that the theme is that sourdough starters are resilient and can take this kind of abuse, because mine's been alive for many, many years. Okay, still sitting in the fridge. Most of the day on Wednesday, we made eggs for breakfast, didn't do any sourdough starter. Then it came back out Wednesday night and got some more flour and water. Now at this point, it was pretty depleted because I took from it without refeeding it. And so I just added tons of flour and water. Maybe it had a cup left, let's say, I didn't measure, and I fed it with 4 cups of flour to get it back up. Now again, I do get asked this a lot. What if I only have a tablespoon of starter left because I use it on a recipe, or maybe the jar fell on the floor and I was able to salvage a little bitty bit? How do I build it back up? Well, if I had a tablespoon left, I'd probably only feed it a cup and some water. The little bit of starter that's in it would take that back over and it would all become sourdough starter again. Now, if I have a whole cup in there, I'm just gonna throw in tons of flour and water and it'll all be bubbling again within just a few hours. This is the same as when you take a little bit of starter and you're soaking English muffin dough. So you'll take a half a cup of starter, a cup or 2 cups of flour, and a cup of water. And that little tiny half cup of starter takes over the whole thing and makes it all bubbly. So it's the same thing when you're feeding your starter. As long as you have a little bit of starter that has a lot of those beneficial bacteria and yeast in it, when you add that flour and water, it'll take the whole thing over and it will all become sourdough starter. So you can build it up quickly. It doesn't have to happen over a long period of time. Now I know that the confusion that happens with that is a lot of times when you're starting your starter, it is all very measured out. And so you attribute that to a mature starter. But once it's mature and bubbling and good, you no longer have to do that. You can add a whole bunch of flour and water and it'll all become starter. So this was Wednesday night. Whenever I fed it with a whole bunch of flour and water, by Thursday morning, it's bubbly and I decided to make some crepes. Now, if I wasn't planning to use it Friday or the rest of the weekend, I would have just thrown it right back in the refrigerator. But I know that I would like to make pancakes on Fridays or Saturdays, and so I kept it out. So after making the crepes, I fed it again, just leaving it on the counter with a little bit more flour and water. Now, the amount that you feed is a little dependent on how much starter you have. So let's say you have 4 cups of sourdough starter sitting in your jar, which I often like to keep a lot, but you can't feed 4 cups of sourdough starter a tablespoon of flour and expect it to be satisfied. Daniel, you are making this so hard with just a tablespoon. So although you can build back up starter really, really quickly, if you're keeping a lot, you'll have to feed it a lot because all of those beneficial bacteria that are in there will consume a tablespoon of flour way too quickly, if that makes sense. So with all that being said, Thursday morning after the crepes, I fed it with the rest of the flour from my milling, and then I made a little bit more flour because I had quite a stash. By Friday morning, it's looking pretty flat and needs a feeding. This is because I fed it Thursday morning, left it out on the counter. I took 3 cups from it to make sourdough pancakes because I always times the recipe by 1.5. The recipe is 2 cups, I do 3. And then after that, I feed it again. Now at this point, there's only about 2 cups left because I used so much to make the pancakes. So then I feed it about equal parts of what was in there. Saturday, I took out a few scoops for crepes, but then left it on the counter. And then afterwards, I fed it a little bit more of my Einkorn flour, and then I put it back in the refrigerator Saturday night because again, we were gone all day on Sunday. Now, some weeks I like to make my sourdough skillet. Sometimes I will make my sourdough cinnamon rolls, which are my absolute favorite recipe to make, but most weeks I don't. Most weeks it involves crepes, pancakes, English muffins, and tortillas. Those are kind of our basics because the English muffins are perfect for sandwiches. The crepes are wonderful for breakfast because they have really high protein. I use about a dozen eggs whenever I make crepes for my family. The tortillas obviously are perfect for tacos. Today, actually, later, I'm gonna be making fish tacos. And then I also do make quite a few pizza crusts. I didn't in this sample week, but to make that, I'll just remove some starter, put it on the pizza stone, and then I might throw it right back in the fridge, or I might feed it if I'm going to be making something else later. Sometimes I have no clue what I'm going to do. I don't even know if I'm gonna be making anything later, and I'll just put it back in the fridge because I think we're gonna be gone, or I'll leave it out thinking, yeah, I'll make something. I don't know what I'll make, but I'll make something. Now let's say that I left it on the counter, I fed it, left it on the counter for a full 24 hours, and then the next day decide that I don't want to make anything with it. I'll just put it right in the fridge. It will slow down the fermentation process, so it isn't really important that it gets fed again before going in the refrigerator. I'll just put it right in the fridge. Next time it comes out, I will feed it, give it a few hours, and it's good to go again. Now recently, I remember whenever I first was sharing about sourdough starter, I think it was probably 2 or 3 years ago actually on my blog, I was talking about it capturing the yeast of the air. Well, recently I was listening to Jill Winger from the Prairie Homestead on her Instagram TV, her IGTV, and she was saying that it actually comes from what is on the flour. Now that would make a lot of sense because that's how fermenting vegetables works. You allow the bacteria that's on the vegetables to take it over. And so the taste and the bacteria profile is all really dependent on what vegetable you're using. Well, apparently that is the same for sourdough starter. So recently I converted mine to Einkorn, which I've mentioned a bunch. I've had a lot of questions about, but I'm still getting really familiar with the ratios and how to do things a little bit differently. I just recently made my first batch of Einkorn bread. But anyways, it has a different smell to it. And it makes a lot of sense to me that it would, because it is growing maybe slightly different bacteria than what was on the flour I was using before. With that being said, I find that my sourdough starter does really well and bubbles no matter what flour I switch it to. I've fed it with freshly ground whole grain flour. In a pinch, I've fed it with all-purpose. I've fed it with Einkorn. And so it seems to be very adaptable, but it will take on a little bit of a different smell and a different taste profile based on what flour you're using. Now, when I say I converted my starter recently to Einkorn, I mean that I just started feeding it with Einkorn. There was really no conversion process. So that's what I've been doing lately. That is a very typical week in the life of my sourdough starter. There have been times when it sat in the fridge for weeks, like in the first trimester of pregnancy. I just don't really feel very well. I don't feel like cooking, and it has done just fine through that. But in an active, we are eating sourdough kind of week, which is most of the time, that is what it looks like. Now, a few things to note. If you are gluten intolerant, you will do best when sourdough has been fermenting at least 24 hours. So when I say, oh, I fed it in the morning and then that later that day we had pizza, that wouldn't really be the best idea if you are gluten intolerant. The best idea would be to feed it in the morning and then use it the next day, make your pancakes, make your crepes, and then feed it again after that for the next day. Another takeaway is that, yes, you can use unfed starter. Don't overcomplicate this. I've had some emails that people are very confused on when you feed it, when you can use it. Like I said, I will take it out of the refrigerator unfed, and my pancakes still bubble up when I add the baking soda. Not as much. Now, a room temperature, freshly fed in the last 8 to 12 hours sourdough starter will get a lot more foamy when you add the baking soda when you're making pancakes, for example. But they still taste fine to me. Now, I'm not an overly picky person. I feel like the taste of sourdough is delicious no matter what. But I find that I still have edible results whenever I do that. So just get familiar with it. Just see how it works in your life. It will be able to sit in the refrigerator even for up to a week. If you just want to, let's say you just want to make sourdough pancakes on Saturday morning and that's all you want to do. Get it out of the refrigerator Friday morning, feed it, make the pancakes Saturday morning, feed it again, leave it on the counter for a few hours to let the bacteria really eat that flour and water, put it back in the fridge, and then repeat the following Friday. And we actually did that for a lot of years. There were a few years where we were being a little bit more conservative on our grains consumption, and we did that. I just made sourdough pancakes on Saturday, and that's how I did it. Now, sometimes I wouldn't even feed it after making pancakes Saturday morning. I just put it back in the fridge and then feed it again Friday. And that's a once weekly feeding, and it did fine through that as well. Okay, now I'm going to jump into my random questions from Instagram. Let's see, which one should I take this week? What is your favorite snack food? Okay, now I'm gonna answer this. What is my favorite? I'm allowed to eat anytime, totally healthy snack food, and then what's my actual favorite snack food. So my favorite snack food, like if Luke and I are gonna get a snack before bed, which happens a lot, would be popcorn for salty. I actually just did a post on my blog that will be going live today or tomorrow on how we make our popcorn on the stove. And then I also love yogurt with honey and granola. I love that. I'm practically addicted to that. Now, what's my favorite snack food that isn't healthy? I'm an ice cream lover and I love chocolate. So if it is the double fudge ice cream with brownies and truffles and just all the add-ins, chocolate on top of chocolate on top of chocolate, that is my favorite. I love it. There's a certain ice cream that is the best. I think it's Breyers. I would know it if I see it, but it is the best. And I will say that my girls and I will do a girls' night on occasion where we lay in me and Luke's bed, me and the girls, eat ice cream, and watch shows. So that is my favorite snack food. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast, a week in the life of my sourdough starter. Make sure that if you don't yet have my sourdough ebook, to grab that for free at bit.ly/farmhouse sourdough. Also, if you haven't yet left a rating on iTunes, if you found any value in this or any value in any of my podcast episodes, it really helps. It's just something that iTunes loves to see, so it helps my podcast to grow. And for me to continue to do this, I definitely need to see growth. So if you could take a minute to leave me a good review over in iTunes, if you found any value from this, I would appreciate it just so much. Thank you.